Good evening and welcome to Rapid Report, your daily source for the most important news and in-depth geopolitical analysis. Tonight, a major tension is shaking North America. U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to block the opening of a critical bridge connecting Windsor, Ontario to D3 in Michigan. This bridge, funded with over $4 billion by the Canadian government, is much more than just infrastructure. It is a vital commercial corridor for trade, manufacturing, and logistics between Canada and the United States. But today, it has become the center of a high-stakes geopolitical showdown. Stay with us, because we will explain why this confrontation could have economic and diplomatic consequences that reach far beyond the border, and why every Canadian and American should be watching this closely. Tonight, U.S. President Donald Trump has launched a new threat against Canada, this time targeting a key border post. The Gordie Bridge, which will connect Windsor, Ontario to D3 in Michigan, is slated to open later this year. However, Trump has warned that he could block its opening, claiming that the bridge was constructed without using any American materials. While the project was overwhelmingly funded by the Canadian federal government, Trump now insists that the United States must be, and I quote, fully compensated. Mark Carney, speaking about a recent call with the U.S. president, described the situation as follows. We discussed the bridge. I explained that Canada, of course, paid for the construction, over $4 billion. Ownership is shared between the state of Michigan and the government of Canada. And in the bridge's construction, there was obviously Canadian steel, Canadian workers, but also American steel and American workers involved. This is an excellent example of cooperation between our countries. I look forward to its opening, which is particularly important for trade, tourism, and travel between Canadians and Americans crossing this bridge. Carney broke the silence on Trump's explosive threat, emphasizing that his response was not merely a defense of a bridge. It was a warning about the power, influence, and future of the North American Economic Alliance. This is far from a routine political disagreement. We are talking about a $6 billion commercial lifeline, largely financed with Canadian funds, now caught in a high-stakes geopolitical tug-of-war. If this crossing is blocked before it even opens, the ripple effects will extend well beyond the border, impacting industries, supply chains, and alliances that underpin the Western economy. At the heart of this confrontation lies the Gordie International Bridge, a next-generation commercial corridor linking Windsor, Ontario to D3 in Michigan. On the surface, it is infrastructure, but strategically, it is one of the most vital economic arteries in the world. Nearly a quarter of all Canada-U.S. trade passes through this region, much of it connected to the automotive sector, advanced manufacturing, and energy logistics. Components cross this border multiple times before a single vehicle rolls off the assembly line. What makes this bridge extraordinary is not just its scale, it is who financed it. Canada covered the overwhelming majority of the project, including key infrastructure on the U.S. side. Ottawa made this investment to guarantee the long-term stability of continental trade. Geopolitically, Canada was not merely building a bridge, it was buying insurance for the industrial future of North America. Then came the shockwave. Donald Trump indicated that the United States could block or delay the bridge's opening, framing it as leverage in broader negotiations with Canada, ranging from trade disputes to border security requirements. He was not suggesting halting construction. The structure is nearly complete. The leverage lies elsewhere: federal permits, customs operations, and safety certifications, all under Washington's authority. Strategically, this is a choke point. You do not need to own an asset if you control access to it. Without U.S. federal authorization, traffic does not move. Supply chains stall. The bridge exists physically but not economically. This threat instantly transformed a binational infrastructure project into a geopolitical bargaining chip. Canada's response was immediate but measured. Rather than escalating politically, Ottawa deployed Mark Carney, a figure known less for speeches than for crisis management. A former central banker experienced in navigating global financial collapses, Carney understands influence and how to counter it. When addressing the threat, his messaging operated on multiple levels. First, he emphasized ownership. Canada financed the project with billions in public funds. Blocking it would obstruct infrastructure largely funded by one of the two partners. Second, he reframed the economic consequences. This bridge is not solely a Canadian asset. American steel and labor were integral to its construction. Michigan's economy depends on it. Any blockade would hurt both sides of the border. Beneath the diplomatic language, a subtler signal emerged. Turning shared infrastructure into a bargaining tool risks undermining trust within the North American alliance at a time when Western supply chains are already under global pressure. Most people do not realize how fragile modern manufacturing logistics are. Companies like Ford Motor Company, General Motors, and Stellantis rely on tightly integrated cross-border production systems. A single vehicle may require parts to traverse the Windsor corridor multiple times during assembly. Even a brief delay can halt production lines, increase costs, and disrupt deliveries. Billions of dollars in economic activity can freeze in just weeks. This bridge was designed precisely to prevent such bottlenecks, adding redundancy and modern border processing to a corridor long dominated by the aging Ambassador Bridge, controlled by private interests. The threat is therefore not symbolic. It strikes at the operational heart of North America's industrial engine. There is also a quieter power shift embedded in this story. For decades, cross-border trade in this region relied heavily on private infrastructure control. The Gordie Bridge changes this equation, introducing publicly governed capacity into a corridor effectively monopolized. This redistribution of logistical power has profound economic and political implications. Controlling trade routes allows influence over tariffs, tolls, and traffic flows, and by shaping these flows, you shape industrial geography itself. In this sense, the bridge is not just new infrastructure. It represents a restructuring of continental commercial authority. If the opening is blocked or significantly delayed, the consequences would be immediate. Automotive manufacturing would feel the first shock, but the impact would not stop there. Logistics companies would reroute shipments at higher costs. Energy and agricultural exports would slow. Insurance premiums and fees would surge. Legal disputes could emerge under continental trade agreements, with Canada potentially seeking compensation for obstructed access to infrastructure it financed. Diplomatically, the fallout could be even more severe. Using shared infrastructure as a bargaining tool risks shifting Canada-U.S. relations from cooperative integration to transactional negotiation, a subtle but profound change in the psychology of the alliance. Stepping back, this dispute reflects a broader global pattern. Infrastructure, ports, pipelines, bridges, data cables, is increasingly treated as a geopolitical lever. From European energy corridors to Asian shipping lanes, physical connectivity is now part of strategic competition. The Gordie Bridge impasse shows that even the world's most peaceful border is not immune to this logic. This is not merely about whether a bridge opens on time. It is about whether allies begin treating shared economic lifelines as pressure tools. Once infrastructure becomes leverage, trust becomes conditional. And if conditional trust comes to define the future of North American trade, the real risk is not a delayed bridge. It is a weakened alliance at a moment when global power competition intensifies. Concrete can be poured, cables can be fixed, but politically this bridge is still under negotiation. That is why Mark Carney's response matters far beyond this moment. He was not just answering Trump. He was signaling that Canada understands the new rules of power and will not pretend this is ordinary politics. In a world where supply chains have already been weaponized and allies subtly protect themselves against one another, even a bridge can become a test of sovereignty. The next steps will be closely watched, not only in Ottawa and Washington, but in boardrooms, factories, and foreign capitals worldwide. If the Gordie Bridge opens without obstruction, it reinforces the idea that cooperation prevails. But if it is delayed, politicized, or used as leverage, it sets a precedent that no shared infrastructure is truly safe. Once one ally proves willing to pull this lever, others will take note. Then, the issue will no longer be a bridge between Windsor and D3. It will be how many other economic, political, and strategic connections can be quietly held hostage in the future. This is the real warning embedded in this moment, and why the story is far from over. Geopolitical leverage and infrastructure as a political tool. The Gordie Bridge situation exemplifies a growing global trend. Infrastructure is no longer neutral. Bridges, ports, pipelines, and even communication cables are increasingly viewed as levers of political and economic influence. Leverage versus ownership. Trump's threat highlights that physical ownership of an asset is less important than control over access and regulation. Even though Canada financed the majority of the bridge, the U.S. retains regulatory authority over border operations, permits, and certifications. This creates a vulnerability. A sovereign asset can be frozen economically without ever being physically seized. Normalization of conditional cooperation. If this approach succeeds, it could normalize the concept of using shared infrastructure as leverage in international diplomacy, potentially eroding trust in long-standing economic alliances like the U.S.-Canada partnership. Economic fragility and supply chain exposure. Modern North American manufacturing, particularly in the automotive sector, is built on highly integrated cross-border supply chains. The Gordie Bridge is a vital artery in this network. A single car might have components crossing the border multiple times before assembly. Any delay, even temporary, can ripple through multiple manufacturers. Beyond automotive, energy exports, agriculture, and logistics are all dependent on predictable border operations. Disruption could cause multi-billion-dollar losses, higher costs for consumers, and insurance spikes. The bridge's redundancy and modern border processing were specifically designed to prevent bottlenecks that could cripple continental trade. Trump's leverage threatens to undermine that planning. Political signaling and alliance dynamics. Mark Carney's response to Trump was not just about defending a bridge. It was a signal to the U.S., to Canada's allies, and to global markets. Internal political messaging. Carney's firm stance demonstrates that Canada recognizes the strategic value of infrastructure and is unwilling to allow coercion over shared assets. Alliance psychology. By turning a potentially transactional situation into a demonstration of firm negotiation, Canada reinforces the principle that alliances are not simply economic conveniences. They are underpinned by mutual respect and trust. Undermining these principles sets dangerous precedents. Global observation. Other countries are watching. How the U.S. uses or refrains from using leverage over allies could influence future negotiations over ports, pipelines, and critical supply chains worldwide. Strategic implications for North America. The Gordie Bridge is more than a regional project. It's a case study in the continental balance of economic and political power. Redistribution of logistical authority. By moving control of a major corridor from private hands to a publicly governed model, the bridge shifts the balance of power. Canada now has more influence over cross-border trade, which historically was dominated by U.S. private infrastructure. Continental resilience versus vulnerability. While the bridge increases efficiency and redundancy, the U.S. threat exposes systemic vulnerability. North American economic stability is dependent not just on infrastructure, but on mutual adherence to predictable governance. Threats of leverage could encourage businesses to diversify supply chains or rethink investment strategies, potentially slowing economic integration. Future precedent. If infrastructure can be politically weaponized, corporations and governments may need to reassess how they design cross-border projects. The Gordie Bridge may become the benchmark case for infrastructure diplomacy, where construction decisions are inseparable from geopolitical strategy. Broader global context. This conflict mirrors trends seen in other regions. Europe, energy corridors and pipelines have become geopolitical weapons, influencing political alignment. Asia. Strategic ports and shipping lanes are points of leverage in territorial and economic disputes. Africa and Latin America. Infrastructure investments by foreign powers are often tied to political influence or debt leverage. The Gordie Bridge is a microcosm of this reality. Even the most peaceful integrated borders can be subjected to high-stakes economic pressure if the rules of leverage are applied. The real risk, erosion of trust. Ultimately, the threat to the Gordie Bridge is less about one bridge and more about the psychological fabric of international alliances. Conditional trust. Alliances depend on predictable behavior and mutual interest. When one party demonstrates willingness to weaponize shared infrastructure, it introduces conditional trust. Partners can no longer assume cooperation without caveats. Strategic uncertainty. Uncertainty about access and leverage increases costs, slows investment, and forces governments and corporations to factor political risk into everyday operational decisions. The Gordie Bridge is not only a $6 billion infrastructure project, it is a test of how resilient North America's economic and political alliances are under pressure. The outcome will reverberate far beyond Windsor and D3, shaping the future of trade, cooperation, and strategic infrastructure policy across the continent. That wraps up this special report on the Gordie Bridge and the growing tension between Canada and the United States. If you want to stay updated on this story and all major international news, subscribe now to Rapid Report. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends and colleagues, and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Every share helps us continue delivering accurate, insightful analysis. Stay tuned, because in today's world, even a single bridge can become a strategic test, and we're here to explain every angle.